your portal to the unexplained. Get ready to delve into the depths of the supernatural with us. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to be part of our ever-growing community of truth seekers. Let's dive into the unknown together. Ghost in the Coal Mine. I was born in 1968. I'm the son of a miner father and a miner myself. I'm the father of 2 children. The incident happened to me in a mine where I worked a year or 2 before I retired. Everything started after an accident in the mine. That day I went to the workplace as usual. In the morning, after having breakfast in the canteen of the workplace, I got into the cage to go 260 meters underground. And when I say cage, I mean elevator. We mine workers preferred to call it a cage instead of an elevator because it was a simple device that worked with a large crane rather than an elevator. Anyway, I went down into the mine. After working until the end of the shift, I started walking toward the bottom of the shaft. We call the place where we got into the cage the bottom of the shaft. As I walked slowly, an engine passed by me quickly. What I call an engine can be considered as a small train. It was a relatively simple device compared to the train, pulling only wagons weighing up to 1 ton at most. There were workers on the engine. Normally, they're forbidden to do this, but sometimes when the workers are very tired after work, they ride on the engine to avoid walking. I continued to walk slowly as the engine sped past me. Then there was shouting coming up from ahead. Someone seemed to be moaning in a wheezing voice. I moved toward the direction of the sound in order to understand exactly what was happening. I started to look around carefully. When I approached the place where the sound came from, I saw that somebody was lying in the water channel on the side of the air door. Blood was flowing from the person lying in the water channel as if from a faucet. At that moment, I went into short-term shock. In that chaos, we immediately carried the injured person to the lift entrance, which we call the bottom of the shaft. We sent him to the hospital. I could still not get over the shock of that image, and that day that person who was injured in that accident died. This incident affected me deeply. My psychology turned upside down. According to what I learned later, the accident happened as follows. While the workers were traveling with the engine, the door didn't open. Since the engine was also fast, the engine hit the door with great violence. The worker who was caught between the engine and the door was crushed badly during this impact. In the days following this incident, when I passed through that gate, it always seemed to me as if someone was still lying in the water channel. I couldn't pass through there by myself. Since the hearth wasn't sufficiently lit, it was always very dark inside the hearth. It was only illuminated by fluorescent lamps, which were very sparsely placed in certain parts of the hearth. Because of the effect of this incident, I was completely disenchanted with work. I didn't feel like going to work at all, but I had to. Anyway, one day when I was at work again, I was the last one left at the end of the work area of the mine where I was working. When I looked around, everybody had left. I sat down somewhere. Such a weight fell on me that it seemed like a lifetime to go from there to the lift area, which the workers called the bottom of the shaft yet again. I said to myself, I'll rest a little while I'm sitting here and then I'll go. My eyes closed for a while and I was between sleep and wakefulness. I saw a man approaching me from ahead, holding a lamp in his hand. There's no work left at the stove at this hour. Guess he stayed later like me. As I said this to myself, that light that was approaching me suddenly disappeared. Oh my God, where did this man go? Then I thought, let me sit for 1 or 2 more minutes. Maybe the man who just disappeared will come back and we can go to the lift together. Then my eyes closed again. I don't know how much time passed, but suddenly I woke up with a very severe slap. But what a slap! I thought my neck was broken. I immediately recovered and looked around me. There was no one. It was impossible for somebody to hit me and run away, and for this reason, I started running toward the lift in fear and panic. That day I didn't tell anyone about what had happened. 1 or 2 weeks later, I was the last one again. This time I hurried up and went straight to the lift entrance. As I sat down and waited for the lift to arrive, I noticed that something jet black was coming toward me. It had a hand lamp and a hard hat, but neither of them was lit. It was slowly approaching me, and I called out from afar, "Master, what's wrong? Did the lamp malfunction?" He didn't answer. Instead, it just kept coming towards me slowly. I felt a strong sense of fear that I didn't know why. I wanted to get up and leave. I even wanted to run away, but I was paralyzed. I couldn't move. Although he was very close to me, I couldn't see his face or body clearly. It was as if the man coming toward me was not a tangible substance, but a shadow, a silhouette. "Don't ever sleep on the hearth again," he said to me. I could feel the man's speech not in my ears, but in my brain. He spoke to me and almost telepathically and disappeared. I had heard of such events from a few other people before, but I didn't believe it. At that moment, those stories I had heard just went through my mind. I read all the prayers I knew. That black silhouette had not harmed me, but living that moment had further disrupted my already broken psychology. I couldn't get up from where I was sitting for another 1 to 2 minutes. After a while, I pulled myself together and walked away from there. When I told my friends what had happened to me, they didn't believe me. When I told them what happened to the imam of the village where I lived, the imam believed me and said the following: "They are the owners of the mines. As you know, according to Islamic belief, the souls of martyrs can choose to stay in this world instead of going to the hereafter if they wish. According to a saying of the Islamic prophet Muhammad, those who die under the rubble are considered martyrs, just like those who die in war. That's why we call people who died in the mines mine martyrs. Most probably that thing you saw in the mine was the spirit of a mine martyr, and it warned you. He wanted to protect you. After that day, I never slept in the mine again." The mysterious death of Aunt Fiden. My father's family used to live in the Palu district of Elazig City, Turkey. He had an aunt whose name is Fiden. She'd been able to talk with 3-lettered beings since her youth. Aunt Fiden was in her 70s when this story took place. However, my father was still young then. My father was passing in front of the house of his aunt while going to the coffee house. Aunt Fiden was in the garden. When their eyes met, Aunt Fiden's gaze was like the gaze of someone in a trance. My father greeted him, but this aunt didn't respond. He thought, "Wonder if something happened." But he didn't care a lot and kept going on his way. In the evening, my father remembered his aunt and decided to visit her. When he arrived at the house of his aunt, Aunt Fiden was sick and lying on her bed. She was talking in her sleep. "Small jinn, come here. The green jinn, do not climb up on the ceiling." My father took her to the to the health center in the village in his car. They gave her an injection and she regained consciousness. Again, one day the village guards, there's 2 of them, they saw Aunt Fiden running in a hurry and looking at her back toward the fields in the dark. They yelled, "Aunt, stop!" But Aunt Fiden didn't listen to them. When the guards followed her, Aunt Fiden had already disappeared. In the morning, the guards told my father what happened the previous night. My father visited the house of his aunt. His aunt was at home, and he asked, "What happened, Aunt? Where'd you go?" His aunt replied, "No, I didn't go anywhere." One night, Aunt Fiden disappeared. Her neighbors were alarmed and started to look for her. Everyone was looking for Aunt Fiden in different areas, and in the end, my father's uncle Mahmoud found Aunt Fiden next to Lake Murat, which is about 400 meters away from the village. Aunt Fiden was sitting in the dark on her own and looking at the waves in a trance-like state. However, her feet were bare. The interesting thing is she didn't have any scratches on her feet. However, despite he was wearing shoes and socks, Uncle Mahmoud's feet were bruised and scarred due to thorns and gravel on the path to the lake. Aunt Fiden didn't have any physical discomfort or sickness when they took her home that night. However, she was talking and screaming by herself. She didn't have any mental or physical sickness before she started to act weird. No one could figure out how a healthy woman can turn into this state in just a year. The next morning, Aunt Fiden was found strangled to death in her barn. As much as I learned from what my father told, according to the villagers, jinns tortured and killed Aunt Fiden. Despite years past, some villagers claim that they see Aunt Fiden walking in a hurry. In Turkish, the word jinn is written as sin, since it is believed that the mention of the word sin summons the jinn to the place where the word is mentioned. The number of letters of the word is often used instead. Village Guard, the official security unit serving the rural settlement areas in Turkey, which are mainly local workers. Treasure guard slapped me in the face. The story I'm about to tell you happened in 2008. I started working in a central Anatolian city where 2 other people were there also to excavate an illegal tumulus, a king's tomb in search of treasure. Our goal was to dig 9 meters to reach the tunnel and the burial chamber. On the first day, we dug 3 meters. We dug at night and stopped working early in the morning. The evening after the excavation, I went to the excavation site and saw that somebody had covered the pit. This didn't mean anything to us, but we had to start digging again. This time, we managed to dig 4 meters deep. However, when we went to the site the next evening, the pit was covered again and we had to dig again. After the excavation, I went and slept on my left side, in my single bed. I dreamt that I was digging in the area. The last axe blow revealed a hole leading to the tunnel. When I widened the hole and entered the tunnel, there was a tall man holding a sword. His skin stuck to his bones next to a pile of gold coins. After we looked at each other for a while, I asked, "Who are you?" He replied, "I'm the guard here. Who are you?" I said, "I'm the new owner of this place." He stood up and said, "Stay away from here, otherwise you will die." And he slapped me hard in the face. After the shock of the dream, I went to the bathroom to check myself in the mirror, and there were purple fingerprints on my face. I couldn't leave the house for a week because of this horrible dream. My friends from the team called me and asked me why I didn't come. I told them about the horrible dream I had and told them that I would never go there again, advised them not to go there either. 1. Illegal antiquities. Illegal antiquities and treasure hunting is very common in Turkey, which is home to many ancient civilizations that have lived in the region for thousands of years. 2. According to Islamic belief, it's frowned upon to turn the left side and sleep. 3. There's a widespread belief in Turkey that treasures that remain buried for a long time are possessed by jinn, or the people who bury the treasure try to protect it with spells or talismans to keep thieves away. Illegal treasure seekers work with hodjas, who talk to jinns in order to keep them away or break these spells. Treasure guarded by jinns. This story happened in 1998 in a village in the Black Sea region. They're spelling Turkey, Turkiye, so I keep screwing it up. But I'm sure that's how they spell it. My name is Serkan. I'm born and raised in Istanbul, the child of an ordinary family. My father was a civil servant, and you know the difficulties of living in Istanbul. My father worked hard to put us 2 children through school, but he had to moonlight on the weekends because he couldn't, keep up financially. So my father often didn't have enough time for us. I used to resent him for that. Now that I'm 35 years old, married with 2 children, I can better understand how unfair I was to my father. I loved the summer months. Gave us financial relief. My father would usually meet my needs like bicycles and computers at the end of the summer, because we had hazelnut orchards back home. Every year we would go to our village in early August, harvest, sell our hazelnuts, then return to Istanbul in early September. August 1998. It was a little bit different from other years, and after those nightmarish days, we never set foot in our hometown again. That year I asked my father for an Atari as a report card present. When he said he would buy it after the hazelnut harvest, the world was mine. God, I couldn't wait to work in that hazelnut orchard in our village. I don't think I would have worked so enthusiastically if I didn't have a vested interest, you could say. One evening at 8 o'clock, our bus was leaving from the bus station. As we were packing our suitcases, I remembered that I'd forgotten my Walkman. I had made my father buy me it last year, so I rushed to my room, grabbed the record button of the stereo from the drawer and a few cassettes that I used to record from the radio and left. The 12-hour journey from Istanbul to our village would have been unbearable otherwise. Uncle Osman, my father's friend, came to our door in this car to take us to the bus station. We didn't wait too long. We loaded the suitcases in the truck and got in the car. It was 20 minutes from our house to the bus station. We arrived at the bus station after a short while. We boarded our bus and set off. As we crossed the Bosphorus Bridge, I thought to myself that I would miss this city, because whenever I went to the village, I missed Istanbul after about a week. Let me tell you a little bit about our village. I don't think I need to tell you about greenery of the Black Sea. There's many big trees and forests in our region, but settlements and their surroundings are usually surrounded by hazelnut gardens. The village center is a place with approximately 130 to 150 households built on a flat area. It was resembling a town rather than a village, with many houses, and they're used by villagers for their shopping needs. As you move away from the center, high hills welcome you. My grandparents' house, the house we're going to stay in, was in the middle of one of these hills. The distance between the center and the house was about 25 minutes on foot. On the way, there was a very old, decaying school and a wooden bridge over the village stream that we had to cross. Every time I crossed that bridge, a shiver ran through my body. I didn't know why. These only 2 households between the village square and the bridge. One of them was far from the bridge. The other was about 50 meters back from the bridge. In this house, there was an old woman named Fadme. They lived alone. She was a strange woman who didn't talk to anyone and hid when she saw people. I'll talk about this woman later. After the bridge, the climb up to the hill began. Sometimes I wondered how I would feel if I had to cross the road at night, which I was afraid to cross even during the day when I was alone. According to my grandfather, Greeks used to live in our village. The Greeks who fled during the War of Independence buried their gold and valuables in various places in hopes that they would come back after the war was over. He also said there were a few people from the village who found gold. After the last incident, no one searched for treasure. One day last year, some foreign people came to the village, introducing themselves as government officials and saying that they were going to make an exploration. My grandfather was suspicious of their contradictory speech, thought that they had to come look for gold. I heard that he had told them about the incident to make them give up. Then the men must have gotten scared because they left the village. This is how it happened. The year was 1979. 3 young men, including Mehmet, the son of Aunt Fatime, were always looking for treasure. One day, while wandering by the stream, Mehmet came across some marks carved in a large rock near the wooden bridge. He got excited thinking that these marks were Greek letters. Although he had passed this place many times before, he had never noticed them. In the evening of that day, he meets the friends at the village cafe, as he does every evening, tells them about this rock. His friends immediately grab a pickaxe and a shovel and say, "Let's go," and they set off. When they come to the creek, just as they're about to start digging, Mehmet's eyes catches the wooden bridge. On this bridge, a few beings with unknown faces and hands were looking at them. In a panic, Mehmet warns his friends and sits behind a rock, trembling and looking at his friends. When his friends look at the bridge, they can't see anything. They put the incident aside and excitedly start digging in various places around the rock. After about an hour of digging, the pickaxe hits a wooden chest. When they lift this chest, they see that there is a jug underneath. Cries of joy echo through the forest. When the friends open the chest and see dried snakeskin, some dried herbs, and a blood-like liquid in a glass bottle, they realize what kind of trouble they've reached. While all of this was happening, Mehmet was already lifting the jug and knocked it to the ground. As the jug's contents are revealed, ear-splitting screams emanate from the woods behind the rock. Terrified, the friends look in the direction of the sound and see a dozen of glowing eyes in the woods. One of the young men collapses. Mehmet and his other friend flee the scene, leaving the gold and their friend on the ground. Since Mehmet's house was close to the scene, he went home soon after. Curious about the young people who didn't go home at the night, their families start looking for them at the first light of the morning. Soon they are found, and lamentations echo in the village square. 1 kilometer away from the scene, the young man who had run away with Mehmet, while telling the villagers he saw on the road about the incident, said that they found me and ran away again, only to be found dead in a hazelnut garden near his house. The other young was lying lifeless, or he had collapsed. Mehmet's fate was unknown. His mother said that Mehmet never came home that day. No one had seen or heard about the gold the youth had found. After these events, the villagers called the creek Sin Creek, and the bridge Sin Creek Bridge. The truth of the matter is this. There was a Greek family here who practiced magic. Before leaving this region, they buried the gold coin somewhere around the rock on the edge of Sin Dursai, cast a spell to protect them from the jinns. What was found in the chest after the young people dug it up were the materials used in the spell. Anyway, we had finally reached our village after a long journey. The minibuses departed from the bus station. They were coming to the village square. By the time we reached the square, my grandfather had already arrived on his motorcycle. We settled on the motorcycle without wasting time. We set off toward her house on the hill. Soon we were at Aunt Fatime's house. She must have heard the sound of the motorcycle because we saw her enter the house as we passed by. Aunt Fatime was a strange person. I didn't even remember hearing her voice before. A little further on, we were greeted by a wooden bridge that smelled of history. Interesting. Ever since I heard the story of this area, every time I crossed it, I got chills. I looked at my grandfather and father, and they were moving their lips. They were obviously shivering and saying prayers as they crossed the bridge. After the crossing the bridge, we started climbing up the steep slope. Soon, the houses of relatives began to appear before us. There were about 15 houses on the hill where our house was located. Most of them were in the house of our relatives. When we reached our house, I went straight to bed. I was very tired. When I woke up, the sun was about to set, and I felt rested. Seeing me waking up, my mother called out from the kitchen, "Sir Khan, my son, we'll set a table under the gazebo. My uncles will come too. Carry these plates." I was happy to hear that my uncles were coming. I had two cousins, Akin and Amre, and they could be considered my peers. We loved each other very much, but because of the long distances between us, we could only see each other 1 month a year. They lived here. After a nice dinner in the garden and the house, my cousins and I started chatting. We agreed that tomorrow we would meet in the village square, eat ice cream, walk around a bit. At such gatherings, we would often buy some junk food and sit in the garden of the old school and eat it. Another reason we chose that secluded place was that when we got together, we would sometimes smoke cigarettes in secret. There weren't many people coming and going, so the risk of getting caught was low. There were a few times when we heard strange noises coming from inside the school. When we would go and look, we would see nothing but a ruin with a single classroom, a very old blackboard on the wall and rotten desks. Actually, it looked very scary, but we were used to it. We came so often. After dinner, tea was brewed. While the elders were chatting in the corner, we 3 cousins were chatting nearby. Then the conversation of the elders caught my attention, and I listened. My father asked my uncle, "There's still no news about Uncle Muhyiddin, is there?" My uncle said, "No, the last time he went after gold in Sin Creek. That was the last time he went. We never found him alive or dead." Uncle Muhyiddin didn't believe the story of Jin Creek. According to him, after finding the treasure that night, Mehmet had killed his friends and escaped with the treasure. Whenever the subject came up, he would say, "Stop these tales of Jins. Mehmet ran away with the gold and he took the lives of 2 young men." Maybe he was right. One day when the subject came up in the village coffee house, Uncle Muhyiddin got angry. "I have no fear if there is a treasure in Sin Creek. There must be other treasures," he said. He goes to the creek with a pickaxe and a shovel. The last people to see him are the workers in the hazelnut garden. The gendarmerie is notified. Gendarmerie, perhaps. That's hard to say. Despite searching for days, no results were found. It was quite late. My uncles got ready, got into their tourist car, and left. The next day at noon, as we had agreed, I set off for the schoolyard to meet the cousins. After about 10 minutes of walking, I arrived at Sin Creek. It looked very beautiful from afar in daylight. A stream with clear water flowing in the middle of the forest. Beautiful bird sounds all around. After looking at it from a distance, I walked toward the bridge. As I got closer, the chills came back. There was a bad energy here. This was obvious. I quickly crossed the bridge and continued on my way. A little ahead, Aunt Fatima was waving her hands as if she was talking to someone. But there was no one in front of her. She soon realized I was coming and quickly entered the house and slammed the door. She must have gone mad with grief after her son disappeared, I thought. When I arrived at the schoolyard, my cousins hadn't arrived yet. While I was waiting, I lit a cigarette. I'd stolen it from my father's pack. I was halfway through when I started by the sound of talking and threw a cigarette away, and my dog in a cone started making loud noises and interrupting me. It was my father's voice. I could hear it very clearly. As I ran away, the rustling sound of dry leaves under my feet gave me away. "Who's there?" They were coming fast. I went to the secluded area behind the school so they wouldn't see me. The back wall of the school was covered with ivy. I found a gap between the vines and leaned my back against the wall of the school. My father would be very angry if he found out I was smoking. Out of fear, I just sat in a hiding place for a while. Then I dozed off and fell asleep. In my dream, I was in the schoolyard. The school was like new. Flowers had been planted in the garden, and there was a colorful landscape. Beautiful bird songs echoed around. A whispery voice was telling me to go inside the school. Children's voices were coming from inside. I approached the window and looked inside myself, and there was a teacher. He was holding a wooden ruler and explaining something on the blackboard. The window I was looking at was directly opposite the blackboard. About 30 children were listening to the lecture with their backs to me. Suddenly I realized that it was getting dark. When I turned around, I was terrified. The beautiful garden I had just seen was gone, replaced by the ruined garden of the school. The sunny weather had been replaced by a gloomy and overcast one. A cloud of fog was slowly coming toward me from about 20 meters away. When I turned my head back in the direction of the school, my heart almost stopped from fear of the sight that I saw. The teacher had been replaced by an ugly creature. Its eyes were white, it was very tall. Its mouth was like a human mouth opened until it tore open. It pointed at me with its index finger and said a word in a language I didn't understand. At that moment, the creatures sitting on the desks of the classroom turned their head toward me without turning their bodies. 30 pairs of white and bright eyes stared at me. Screaming, I turned around and started running into the fog. I had only taken a few steps when hundreds of crows began to caw in their ugly voices from the trees around me. They began to fly and attacked me. The eyes of the crows were red. I was running, trying to protect my head with my hands while I tripped and fell on my face. When I stood up to get up, I saw the creature looking down at me and lunged at me with a horrible scream. I woke up, jumping up, sweat beading on my face. My cousins had either not come, or they had come and left because they couldn't see me. When I saw that it was almost dark, boiling water poured over my head. I was thinking about how to cross Sin Creek in the dark. First, I thought of going to the village square, but that road in the dark was as scary as Sin Creek. The sun was about to set, so I had to make a quick decision. Gathering my courage, I decided to go home and set off. I was still under the influence of the dream I had seen. My legs were shaking. I walked along the road reciting Surah's Falak and Nas. As I passed Aunt Fatime's house, I looked at her windows. There was no movement, not even the light was on. After a while, the Sin Creek Bridge came into view. Whispered voices were coming from my right and left. With each whisper, I turned my head in the direction of the sound. I turned my back to the bridge with the sound coming up from behind me. No one was there. When I turned back to the bridge, the beings lined up on the bridge, and they were looking at me with their white and bright eyes. I wanted to cry out of fear, but I couldn't. I started running backwards with all my strength. The nearest house was Aunt Fatime's house. I arrived at her door, gasping for breath. I was pounding on the door, but no one answered. Whispering voices kept coming. There was a barn in the yard of the house. I ran there to hide. The barn door was locked. It was a barn with 2 compartments. I could hear animal noises coming from the compartment on the left. I went around behind it. There was a window in the room on the right. They had boarded it up. I put all my strength into it, hoping to open it. A piece of wood came loose, and there was a growling sound from inside. While I bent down and looked, I froze. There was someone chained by the neck and feet. He was looking at me, laughing in a voice you'd be surprised to hear coming from a human being. There was no white in his eyes. His eyes were completely black. His hair, beard, and nails were very long. It looked like a wild animal. What was this creature? A crunching sound came from behind me. I looked up and my eyes glazed over. I had been hit on the head with a hard object. When I opened my eyes, I was in the hospital. I learned the rest of the story from my father, and I'll tell you this part as he told it from his mouth. Sirkan said that he had heard that we had come to the ruined school that day, but he had never been there. My brother Amit and I had paperwork in the district. We met early in the morning and went there. On the way back, we stopped by relatives near our house and chatted for a while. Time passed quickly and it was getting close to dark. When we returned home, my wife greeted us in a hurry. When I asked, "What's the matter?" she said, "Sirkan hasn't been around for hours. Something must have happened to him. He was supposed to meet Akim and Amir, but the boys came to ask for Sirkan. They're inside now. Could he have gone to Gin Creek? Stop, ma'am. Calm down. We'll see now. I told Amit to start the car. There was a well-known Hoja who lived on the other side of our hill. That side of the hill was connected to another village. We didn't travel back and forth that way very much. My brother Amit started climbing the hill at full speed. After about 15 minutes, we were at the Hodja's house. We quickly explained the situation. The Hodja took some materials from the shelves and drawers and said, "Let's go." When we came to Sin Creek, the branches of all the trees around the creek were shaking like crazy. There wasn't much wind. "You wait here," said the Hodja, drawing the basmala. He walked toward the center of the bridge. He took something out of his pocket. We don't really know what it was. It was like sand. Poured it into his palm. He said something in Arabic and blew on it. Then he wrapped the rope he took out around the railings of the bridge and started to tie knots while reciting a prayer. He tied a knot after each prayer. Finally, he went down to the stream, made a fire, threw something into it, put out the fire with water he took from the stream. He did everything very quickly. Suddenly, the tree branches stopped swaying and everything calmed down. "Now we can search," said the Hodja. First, we quickly went down to the creek bank, scattered and looked around. On the one hand, we were shouting Sir Khan, and on the other hand, we were scanning the forested area with a flashlight. After a while, I saw a path along the creek bank. This path went all the way to the garden of Aunt Fatime's house. Mehmet's mother. Mehmet was my best friend as a child. We had walked this path together a few times. We had been separated since I was to work abroad at a young age. Then I heard about the unfortunate incident that happened to him. I started walking up the path when I came to Aunt Fatime's garden. I was devastated by the scene that I saw. Aunt Fatime was trying to drag someone off the ground. These were Sir Khan's clothes. I ran and grabbed the old woman and threw her backwards. She hit her head where she fell and remained motionless. Sir Khan's face was covered in blood. The unscrupulous woman must have hit him with a hard object like a shovel. When I checked his pulse, I realized he was alive, and I was thankful. My brother Amit was nearby. He came running when he heard the shouting. I asked Amit for the car keys. "Stay close to this woman," I said, and rush Sir Khan to the hospital. I'll try to tell the last part of the story exactly as my uncle told it to me, as far as I remember. My brother took my nephew and stepped on the gas. I stared at the cloud of dust he left behind him on the dirt road. The teacher had heard the sound, like me, and came. "Did you find the boy? How is he?" he asked. "He's alive, I only know this much." I was asking myself why Aunt Fatime wanted to harm this child. I said to the Hodja, "Hodja, you stay with this woman, I'll take a look around." According to the marks on the ground, the old woman had dragged Sir Khan from the barn side. It was clear from the way the grass was laying. I followed the tracks. She was going behind the barn. There was blood on the ground and a shovel next to him. Why did you want, or what did you want from the child and the woman, I said to myself. There were strange noises coming from the inside. There was a gap at the bottom of the boarded-up window, just enough to see inside. I bent down and looked to my amazement, and there was a person inside whose face looked familiar. His hair and beard were tangled, and he lived in filth. He was making strange noises and trying to attack, but his chains prevented him. When I looked more carefully, I recognized who it was. Poor Mehmet. He had obviously suffered a lot. I called the Hodja to come and take a look. As soon as he saw him, he said, "This poor man is haunted by evil people. Let's break the boards on the windows so I can get inside." With the shovel on the floor, I made enough space for him to enter. Hodja entered by reciting verses. As the Hodja recited verses, Mehmet was almost going crazy. Meanwhile, Aunt Fatime came to my mind. When I looked to check on her, I saw that she wasn't there. I went up the road and looked, but there was no sign of her. When I came to the Hodja with Mehmet, the Hodja put his hand under Mehmet and said, "O demon created by Allah, get out of his body." Mehmet was weak and collapsed on the floor. Haja went inside and asked for help to carry Mehmet. He told me that the possession was very stubborn and that he should take Mehmet to his house and put him up for a few days. He added that it might take a few more sessions, but with Allah's permission, he would save him. This is what my father and uncle told me. When I opened my eyes, I was in the hospital. My mother, father, uncle, cousins, they were all here. They suspected a brain hemorrhage and put me to sleep for 3 days. During this time, with the help of Haja, Mehmet started to get better. He tried to tell my father what he had experienced, what had happened, as much as he could remember. I say he tried because he had a stutter after what he had been through, but the night they found the treasure, Mehmet came home scared. He senses something strange in his mother, but he doesn't pay attention because his mind is on the beings outside. As he looks out of the window, his mother hits him on the head with a hard object. He opens his eyes, chained in an empty room in the barn. His mother and the beings he saw on the bridge that night were on his head. And from that day on, he's always in pain. The Jinn Who Taught Me Sorcery. Really, dog? That summer my father fell ill, and I, as the eldest son, went out to pasture the sheep. That night the moon was very bright, and the stars weren't visible. It was very hot, and I was lying in the grass. Suddenly I heard a noise, and I got up and looked around. When I opened my eyes in the darkness, there was silence all around me. There were no bird song, no breeze of the wind. I could only hear a slight rustling in the grass. I felt a shiver run up through me. I realized that something was moving in the grass. For a moment I saw a shadow moving toward me in the darkness, but then it disappeared. My heart was beating wildly. I looked around, but I couldn't see anything. Only the rustling of the shadow was ringing in my ears. I immediately stood up and ran toward the herd. I remembered the stories of jinns and thought that jinns were following me. I knew I was scaring myself for nothing, but there was nothing I could do. I lived with this fear throughout the night, looking at the herd and listening to the surroundings. I fell asleep while the animals were grazing. When I woke up, the sun was coming up. The fear inside me was still there. I gathered the herd and went home. But when I got home, I realized something was wrong. The door had been left open. A foggy silhouette stood in front of the door. I couldn't see his face. I felt cold inside, but I walked toward the house anyway. He approached me and said in a thin voice, "Shepherd, I watched you and admired your courage, but there's something I must tell you. It's our territory and you must not stay there too long, otherwise no one can protect you." I couldn't respond to his words. My heart was beating like crazy. The jinn smiled at me and continued, "I like brave people like you. Maybe I'll give you a chance. I can teach you something, but you must be loyal to me and do what I say." Hearing these words, my fear increased, but my curiosity was aroused. What was this jinn going to teach me? The jinn touched my shoulder and said, "Think for a night before you decide. Don't disobey me, otherwise you'll regret it." Then he disappeared in the mist, and from that day on I dreamt of him every night. He said he was teaching me sorcery, but he was also watching me. For several days I thought about the jinn's offer. Every night in my dreams he taught me spells and promised to give me power, but I began to feel uncomfortable with this presence. One night in my dream he cast a very powerful spell on me. While I was casting the spell, a dark fog surrounded me and scary creatures appeared. The jinn frightened me and took control of me. It was hurting me a lot and I had to get rid of it. I don't know how to resist the power of the jinn. I researched how to protect myself and found some methods against jinns. I was ready now and I wanted to confront it, but I realized I was wrong. I never saw him again except in dreams. Maybe the first day I saw him was also a dream, but I can't remember exactly. Maybe it was all imagination. My father's illness had gotten worse and the doctors couldn't understand what was happening. Thought it might have something to do with the spell the djinn had cast on me, but I couldn't be sure. One night I went out to graze the sheep again. The djinn appeared. This time he looked scarier. His face was like black smoke and he was sneaking toward me and he said, "Don't you want to serve me?" I looked at him with my eyes trembling with fear and I said no and sighed. But the djinn's power overpowered me and I began to do his bidding. I fearfully submitted to his spell. My days were filled with what he'd taught me in his dreams. One night in my dream, the djinn took me on his back, took me around. The whole place was covered in a dark fog and horrible creatures roamed around. The djinn told me their names, but I can't remember them now. In fear and terror, I continued to do the djinn's bidding. I didn't know how to save myself. My days and nights were filled with nightmares. The stress had worn me out and I could no longer tolerate people. I was talking to my friends and they told me about djinns. They said they had seen me grazing sheep in the evening and that something had happened to me. I got angry and asked them to change the subject. Sarhat laughed at me and said, "Are you scared? A man's not afraid. Let me come with you one night and graze sheep." I replied, "What could happen? Let him come along." We had agreed earlier to meet in front of the fountain, and when I returned home, my mother prepared some food for me. I gathered the sheep, set off after a while, and I saw Sarhat near the fountain. We went into the fields to graze the sheep, and after a while it got quiet. Sarhat suddenly stopped and said that this was a dangerous place, that we should be careful. We kept walking in fear, and I felt that something was going on around us. Our sheep started to get cranky, and some of them tried to run away. Suddenly I saw a being following us in the darkness. A being with glowing eyes was chasing us. Sarhat picked up and ran away to gather the sheep while I tried to go back. But the being with the glowing eyes started to follow me in the dark. "Told you we shouldn't have stayed here," Sarhat shouted. Finally, the being with the glowing eyes grabbed me and said, "You will be my servant and obey my commands." Unable to control myself in the fear and terror, I realized that I was now under its control. I felt like I was being pulled into a dark world and I couldn't find a way out of it. When I came to, it was just getting light and there was no sign of the sheep. I was shocked to see the sheep lying lifeless on the village road. Sarhat was lying among them and his face was mutilated. There was the smell of carcasses around. I couldn't stand it and I had to vomit because I started to feel nauseous. When I was done, I ran to inform the villagers. The villagers were stunned by the horrible incident. Everybody was wondering how the sheep had died and how Sarhat had become like this. Some people claimed that there was a supernatural force behind this terrible event. After a few days, strange things started happening in the village. A woman's voice was heard screaming in the middle of the night. Some villagers said that Sarhat's ghost was haunting the village. The rest claimed that the source of the voice was Sarhat's mother. Indeed, the poor woman had collapsed after the funeral. Every time I passed by their house, she would look at me with disgust. It was obvious that she blamed me for her son's death. If I had let her mock me, there would have been no need for me to prove myself to her. My father and mother were also very upset when the sheep perished. The only source of income for our household had suddenly disappeared. My father's health deteriorated a little bit more with this news. Although my mother didn't show it to me, I could see that she blamed me in her heart. If I had been a little more careful, Sarhat would have lived, and the sheep wouldn't have perished. Sometime after these events, the djinn started to enter my dreams again. "I'm very angry with you, Shepherd. It was too dangerous for you to even come to that area if you brought your friend. How can I trust you now?" I was filled with anger as the voice of the djinn echoed in my ears. "I will teach you to protect yourself," he said, and his bright eyes glittered behind their black clusters. I don't remember what happened, but I never felt the same again. A few days later, I returned to that land, the wind carrying the rustle of the grass to my ears, and the fear inside me vanished. I was no longer afraid of anything. From that day on, he came into my dreams every night and taught me how to cast spells. One of the spells was to heal my father. I wasn't sure if he'd tricked me or not, but I was ready to try anything to make my father healthy again. After a while, I noticed that my father was getting better day by day. He was getting better so fast that the doctors noticed the change immediately. In those days, the headman brought us some sheep. He said he would give us their offspring, if we kept them for him. Suddenly, everything became even better than before. The Jinn woman in my dreams was always teaching me new spells. I was so excited that I tried them out and went on like that for a while. Then everything became more horrible. One night when the woman came into my dream again, I saw the dark silhouette that appeared right behind her, and I woke up in fear. After that night, I never saw the woman again. It didn't take me long to realize that I was being haunted by a different Jinn. I told you to obey my command. Now you're completely under it. There's no way to get rid of me. He couldn't hide you from me forever. That day I realized I was haunted by two different Jinns. One wanted to protect me from the other, but the evil one had somehow defeated him. My father's health started to deteriorate again, and I felt so helpless. I tried my spells, but this time they didn't work. In the middle of the night, with my arms crossed, I thought, "This is the end for you. I will not set you free." At that moment, the door of the room flew open and a bright light flooded in. The woman who had saved me from the clutches of the evil Jinn reappeared, and she said, "I will save you. Cast a powerful spell that will destroy the dark Jinn." This time, my father's health really began to improve, and I happily continued to practice what she had taught me. But the fear of the evil Jinn reappearing always haunted me. One night when I asked him about it, he told me that I had been going to that pasture since I was a child, that I was attracted to them, and that they were trying to use me to serve them. At first, this was his intention too, but then he took pity on me and wanted to help me. My fear increased even more after I learned this. After that day, he didn't enter my dreams for a while. I continued to cast spells to heal my father, and soon he recovered completely. That year, the sheep gave birth in pairs. We had twice as many lambs as the sheep at that. Thanks to the headman, he wanted to help us without embarrassing us and found such a remedy. Before I turned 18, I married a girl found by my family. We lost a baby in the first year of my marriage. I didn't want to resort to sorcery again, but my wife was very upset about it. It was eating me up inside. I knew I was sinning. But whatever you say, the child at that time was right. We welcomed our first child with the help of the woman in my dream. As the fear of something happening to my child grew every day, I realized even more that I had to stay away from spells. I told her I would never cast a spell again. She refused. When he said that he would take the child back, I realized that I had to get rid of the village and him somehow. With the support of my fathers, I moved to Mirsin, where I started working at a car wash. After learning the business, I opened a shop for myself and improved my business in a short time. With the good news of my wife's second baby, I cleared my head and moved to my father's in a house closer to us in Mirsin. All of my siblings studied and saved themselves. Sometimes that Jinn comes into my dreams. I feel that she's angry, but I keep the realm away from them with the spells that she taught me. Sometimes my daughters talk about a woman calling them, and this worries me a lot. It was late, but I realized that she had tricked me with spells and that they were all bad from the beginning, but it was too late. My Ghost Mom. I had just come home from school. My father wasn't home because he was at work at that time. My mom answered the door. Naturally, I hugged her, kissed her cheeks, and asked what was for dinner. She didn't answer me, though. I didn't push her, thinking she mustn't. Maybe she just didn't hear it. Then it started to get dark. My mom helped me do my homework, and then the bell rang. My mom said, "You answer the door." So I ran to the open door, hugged and kissed my father. Then we went into the living room. My mom gave me the hush sign. There was something strange. Looking at my father's movements, it was as if he didn't see her. There was no greeting or any other conversation between them. Even with my child mind, the situation struck me as strange. I was scared, but I kept quiet. I didn't say anything to anyone. When it was around 10 p.m., I went to my room to sleep. My mom was sitting by my bed. Not giving me a chance to ask her why my father couldn't see her, she started telling me a story. Since I was still a small child, I started to listen. I fell asleep while listening to my mother's story. When I woke up in the morning, my father brought my school uniform to my room. My mom helped me put it on, and then I went to school as I always did. And that was how my days went for about a week. Every day it seemed like my mom was helping me in a way that my dad couldn't see. Then 2 more days passed and things started to change. My mom came at me with a knife. "Do you want to come at me?" she yelled, and I got scared and started crying. And by the way, my mother had been sick with cancer for years. That evening, my father told me that my mother had passed away in the hospital a week earlier. He had been just waiting for a right time to tell me in a proper way. But when my father found out what I had experienced with my mother for a week, he told me that what I had seen couldn't be real, but everything I experienced was real. She even made me do my homework, that spirit thing. Anyway, when I insisted that what I saw was real, my father took me to a psychologist. The psychologist said that it was impossible for a girl of my age to make up such things that she said she had seen. These words of the psychologist proved, that what I had seen was real. When we moved out of that house and settled into an apartment, this is 100% true. I personally experienced all of these things. My friend's magnificent gin. Last year, 2021, an acquaintance of mine came to my workplace with a friend. We had a small trade with this acquaintance. In the meantime, we had a casual acquaintance and a short conversation with a friend that he brought with him. 3 days later, close to closing time of our store, one of my childhood friends came to my workplace to shop. After we finished shopping, I closed the store. In response to my offer, my childhood friend told me that he was going to meet another friend and said, "Come along, you can meet my friend." I politely declined my friend's offer and avoid embarrassment, but my friend insisted, so I accepted his offer. We went to a cafe together, and my friend's friend was sitting there waiting for us. I recognized my friend's friend as soon as I saw him. This was the person I mentioned at the beginning of the story, the person I met at my workplace. It was such a coincidence, but of course, he recognized me too, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. "I think we've met you before," he said. I said, we've met. He burned the djinn who fell in love with him. We sat down and started chatting. As the time progressed, the conversation got darker and fairy, jinn, etc. conversations opened up. During the conversation, my friends told me, "I had a fairy until 2 years ago. She was in love with me." Then he started to explain that this fairy appeared to him through a queen who had lived in ancient times, how she came and went and so on. I asked him, "What happened then?" He replied, "I had it burned by a Hadja 2 years ago because it confused me so much. I was out of balance." He answered my question. The Hadja gave him a guardian jinn. After he left, others, malicious ones, started coming. They tried to haunt me. So I went to another Hadja who said, "They won't be able to bother you anymore. I'm giving you a guardian jinn." And he gave me a grandfather jinn, a Muslim jinn. He's even with me right now. He comes when I call his name and in the evenings, but he gets angry with me if I call him for no reason, and if I drank alcohol. He's very imposing. He always will have a rosary in his hand. But of course I didn't believe what he told me. I let him know that I didn't believe it either. He's here now, he's looking at us. I can show it to you if you want, but you'll be scared to shout. I said, show me. He wouldn't. Aha, I said. It's a lie. The thing in the fog. Anyway, we finished the conversation and left. 2 weeks passed and we met this friend again one evening. We sat in a cafe and chatted. Then we got into the car and started traveling. We were driving at a speed of 40 to 50 kilometers on a straight road, leading to a village road. A fog descended on the road ahead. My friend asked me to stop where the fog started. I stopped. He got out of the car. The roadside was grassy, there was no trees around. There were only bushes. You see, it was a flat open land. It was foggy, but this fog was only where we were. He asked me to get out of the car quickly and go to him. I got out of the car as my friend told me, and he pointed to a spot ahead and said, "Take a good look here." And I looked. My friend's glorious guardian jinn. I saw him where he was pointing, about 50 meters ahead of us. He was 5 meters tall, maybe taller. He was going left and right. I could only see him as a gray, shadowy figure from his feet to his chest. Strangely, I couldn't see his face. I watched him for about 3 minutes. His outfit resembled the costumes of Hasavat Karagos. After 3 minutes, he disappeared. The fog disappeared with him. Then we got into the car, and my friend asked me to drive the car to the school. We arrived in front of the school, and there was about 150 meters between us and the school. The staircase lights at the entrance of the school and the lights of a few rooms in the building were on. At the top of the stairs, there was a jet-black man standing there. He disappeared after 1 minute, and after that, I started to believe what my friend had told me. Three open graves in the field. About 5 years ago, late in the evening, I was sitting with 6 of my friends, one of whom was an imam, and we were chatting. During the conversation, the topic turned to the subject, and finally we started talking about jinns. We realized that dry talk about jinns doesn't excite us. Let's go out into the forest, thinking that maybe we would meet one. Anyway, we were wandering the forest, chatting and chatting. It was around 1 a.m. and we're moving through the forest. But at the same time we were scared. But nobody shows that they're scared. The forest is pitch black. We move forward with the phone light. After walking like this for a while, the forested area ended and we reached a grassy field. There we discovered 3 grave-shaped pits about 1.5 meters deep, which I guessed had probably been dug by treasure hunters. After seeing these pits, I started to get scared. We'd better go back now. Let's not fall victim to a blind bullet by hunters here. But my companions ignored me, continued to examine excavations with curiosity. I mean, okay, 3 graves dug in the middle of a field were interesting as well as scary. But I wasn't sure what my friends had found in these pits to examine so much. Were they going to find treasure or corpses just left in these open pits or graves? Even my friend, whom I called my imam friend, was bent down like the others, examining one of the pits with careful eyes. Suddenly, something hit this imam friend in the chest very violently. We couldn't even see what hit him, but the sound of the impact was very bad. My friend was thrown back 3 meters by the impact and fell onto his back. He stayed where he fell. We all froze, thought my friend was dead. If that thing that hit my friend was a physical substance, it would have been impossible for us not to hear the whistling sound of an object coming at that speed. Also, after the impact, that object would have had to somehow bounce back or fall to the ground, just like it did to our friend. But there was no object that we could say, "This is what hit him." My first involuntary reaction was to start reciting Falak. Felak-Nas. But I say, Kul Yezu Baira Bil Falak. And the rest doesn't come, and I say, Kul Azio Birabanas. And the rest doesn't come. You know when you're in a nightmare state and you're awake, you want to shout, call someone, or recite a prayer, but you just can't? I couldn't pronounce the surahs that I'd memorized since my childhood. And after reciting the first verses of these surahs, I knew by heart I was locked as if I was tongue-tied, couldn't read the rest. I feel ya. Thus, about a minute or so passed. After we got over the initial shock of this unexpected event, we lifted our friend up. He wasn't in as bad of a condition as we thought. He was able to stand up and walk. He was just a bit dazed. He was also a bit dazed just like us. After lifting our friend to his feet, we panicked and said, "Let's get out of here," and set off. We started to walk back the way that we had come in silence, with all of our timidity. We had walked 150 meters or so, and we were just near the end of the field or the beginning of the forest when we heard two people talking at the same time. Cracking sounds come from the forest. We all stopped at that same time. We looked at each other. This fearful silence lasted for a while. It's hard to say really how long it lasted. To make sure that we had heard the same thing, we all stopped for the same reason. I asked the friend walking next to me why he had stopped. He said he heard voices talking. Yep, now we were sure. We were not alone there. One of the instinctive cautions, we all listened to the sound coming from the forest. The sounds of talking kept coming. But the voices that we heard speaking were not in our language, or rather in any language that we could understand. Someone or something said strange words that I still remember today, even though it's been a long time since the incident, such as Arak Varak Tarak, which didn't make any sense to us. Another voice, as if responding to him, pronounced some other meaningless words, such as Gara Kuru Daki Madak. The Imam started reciting some prayers for protection. After what we had just experienced, it was not wise to go into the forest, but it was the only way to reach the roadside where we had parked the car. The first time we had entered the forest with a smile, now we entered the forest out of fear, reciting prayers. We came out of the forest reciting prayers. We finally reached the road when we reached our village, our home. We talked about what we had been through until morning, but we couldn't come to a conclusion, other than the conclusion of tonight's stories. See ya.